I am Maribel, and this is my podcast Global Learning. Welcome to my first episode. Today, we will talk about one of the most ambitious global projects over time, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It starts with a big promise to transform our world. But then, years later, we must ask how much has really changed, what progress has been made, and what problems are still hidden behind official speeches and reports. In this episode, we will explore one of the 2030 agenda is how it began and what goals it includes, how progress is measured, and most importantly, what results we can really see. Well, we'll also explore which sources and databases help us understand the truth behind the official numbers. Well, first, you need to know what is the 2030 Agenda. The 2030 Agenda was adopted in September 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly through the resolutions ARES 70 and 1 called Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This document replaced the Millennium Development Goals (MDGs), which guided international cooperation between the 20s and the 2015. But now, but the new agenda changed the idea completely. It is universal, meaning all countries, rich and poor, share responsibility for sustainable development. Its main slogan is "Leave no one behind." In theory, this means that no person or group should be excluded by the benefits or process, but because of poverty, gender, ethnicity, or where they live. However, as well we see later, turning this promise into reality has not been easy. Well, how the 23 agenda was created. The story behind the in 2012 during the Rio Plus 20 conference in Brazil, officially called the United Nations Conference of Sustainable Development, the world leaders decided to create a new set of goals that will combine economic, social, and environmental dimensions. In 2013, the UN formed the Open Working Group, the OWG, with representatives from 70 countries. They spent almost 2 years discussing of analyzing hungry proposal for governments, experts, and civil organizations. In 2014, the group represented a first draft with the 70 goals and 169 targets. That number was not random. It represents a balance between all the areas of sustainable development. In 2015, after long negotiations, the final version of the 2030 Agenda was approved. It included not only the 17 goals, but also the system for monitoring, financiation, and global cooperation in 2016 countries. Began their official implementation and started presenting voluntary nation reviews, the VNRS, to explain their process and challenge. And In the 2017, the UN General Assembly approved the Global Framework of Indicators coordinated by the Interagency and Expert Groups on SDG Indicators, IAEG SDGs. This framework defines how to measure every target and compare progress around the world. So, between the 2012 and 2017, the world went to the idea of renewing the old MDGs to build a much later complex system to monitor sustainable development. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals, a general map. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, cover almost every area of human life and the planet. Let's review the main ideas behind them. It's no poverty and zero hunger, and in extreme poverty and food insecurity, the good health and well-being, equality, education, and gender equality, the social core of the goals, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work, and economic growth, connecting people and prosperity, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and reduce inequalities for fighting growth, sustainable cities and communities essential in our urban work, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, and life on land. The environmental group, peace, justice, and strong institutions in partnership for the goals, the political and financial foundations, and each goal include specific indicators. For example, Goal 1 measures the number of people living on less than 2.15 USD per day. The Goal 13 looking at the carbon emission and climate adaptations. And the Goal 5 studies the number of women in leadership positions. The challenge is that many countries don't have complete or updated data, making it difficult to know if progress is real. Now, the sources databases to measure progress. To study the 23 agenda seriously, it's important to know where the information comes from and what its limits are. Official sources include the UN HDG Global Database managed by the UN Statistic Divisions, the Voluntary National Reviews VNR, available on the High-Level Political Forum HLPF website, reports for UNDP, UNICEF, the WHO, FAO, and the World Bank. It depends on sources, including the HDG Index for Sustainable Development Solutions Network, SDGSN, which ranks country every year. Reports from Transparency International, Oxfam, Work Inequality Database, and or work in data. Financial databases such as OECD data or INF data portal to track investment and sustainable projects. These sources help us see what official reports sometimes hide. Larger international inequalities, environmental setbacks, or a lack of real investment. For example, some countries show good results in education, Goal 4, by reporting high school enrollment rates, but they ignore data about equality of education or regional inequality where the reality can be very different. Now, some tensions and contradictions behind the optimistic tone of the UN reports. The situation is more complicated. Independent studies like the SDG Index reported 2024 show that no country is really on track to achieve all the 17 goals by the 2030. Some areas have advances, for example, access to education or reduction of extreme poverty, but there are serious problems in gender equality, climate actions, and biodiversity. The COVID-19 pandemic made things worse. Poverty increased for the first time in 20 years, and economic inequality between countries become larger. Another serious issue is financing. According to the UN, there is a $4 trillion annual gap in the funding needed to reach the goal. Many countries don't have enough public resources, and international aid is not growing fast enough. There also a data gap about the 40% of the official indicators still have no reliable or comparable data. This allows some governments to report progress that is not actually proven. Is in simpler terms, the 2030 agenda faces a big conflict between global ambitions and the real capacity. Let's continue check some areas with positive and serious problems. First, areas with positive progress. The goal 7, affordable and clean energy. Renewable energy using is growing, especially in Europe and Asia. The goal 3, the good health. Children mortality is decreasing and more people have access to healthcare. In the goal for quality education, more than 130 countries have almost universal primary education. In the areas with serious problems, the goal 13, climate actions, global emissions are still rising. Few countries meet their targets. In the goals 14 and 15, live life below water and on land, deforestation and biodiversity loss continue. In the goal 10, reducing inequalities, the richest 10% of people own more than half in global wealth. Regions with the biggest challenge is Sub-Saharan Africa, where populations grow is faster than improvements in health or education. South Asia, due to its depends on fossil fuels. And finally, Latin America, where inequality and corruption reduce the impact of the public policies. Well, the 23 Agenda was born from a dream, a vision of a fair, peaceful, and sustainable world, but its biggest problem is not technical, it is political. The gap between commitment on a real action. In the past decade, the international community created hundreds for indicators, reports, and meetings, but the real question remains: can we truly transform the world without transforming the system of power, consumption, and inequality that shape? The year 2030 is getting closer. And beyond speeches and document sources will depend not only on what governments declare on but on what societies demand measure and goal accountable. Well, this is as for my first episode. Thanks for listening.